Rain hammered against the metal roof, loud enough to drown out the hum of the old workshop machines. The wind howled through the gaps in the siding, carrying the smell of wet earth and rust. Ethan sat at his workbench, welding a broken engine part, when a faint, almost hesitant knock reached his ears. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks. Then it came again. 3 soft taps, like someone too afraid to be heard. He set down his tool, wiping his hands on a rag, and walked to the door. The workshop was in the middle of nowhere, deep in the outskirts of the colony's industrial zone. No one came here without a reason. When he opened the door, cold rain rushed in, hitting his face. Standing there was a small alien girl, drenched from head to toe. Her skin had a faint lilac hue, her big silver eyes shimmering with fear. She clutched a torn blanket around her shoulders, her lips trembling. "Be my dad. I won't misbehave," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain. Before Ethan could react, her legs buckled, and she collapsed into his arms. He caught her, feeling how cold her skin was, almost icy. She was light, too light, like she hadn't eaten properly in days. He carried her inside, laying her gently on an old couch. Under the dim light, he saw bruises scattered along her arms, thin red marks around her wrists as if she'd been tied. The blanket she clutched was strange, dark fabric with a golden crest stitched in the corner. Ethan didn't recognize it, but something about it felt important. He fetched a towel and wrapped it around her, but she didn't wake. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. He went to the old heater, kicked it twice, and it groaned to life, filling the room with a faint orange glow. As he worked to warm her, a low hum reached his ears. At first, he thought it was the heater acting up, but the sound grew louder, mechanical, coming from outside. He stepped to the window and peeked through the blinds. In the distance, bluish lights flickered in the rain, 3 hover bikes, moving slowly down the road toward his workshop. The riders wore dark armor, their helmets glowing faintly. Even from far away, Ethan could see they weren't human. His gut tightened. Whoever they weren't here for a friendly visit. He glanced back at the girl, still unconscious, still clutching the blanket like it was her last possession. Without thinking, he scooped her up and moved to the far corner of the workshop. He slid open a hidden panel under one of his benches, revealing a narrow storage compartment. "Sorry, kid," he muttered, placing her inside and covering her with an old tarp. He crouched beside her for a second, making sure she could breathe, then closed the panel. The hum of the bikes grew closer until it stopped right outside. A heavy metallic knock echoed through the building, making the walls tremble. A distorted voice called out in a language Ethan didn't fully understand, but the tone was sharp, commanding. He didn't answer. He stood still, listening to the sound of boots hitting wet ground. Through the side window, he saw one of them step into the beam of his floodlight. Its armor was sleek and curved, the visor glowing crimson. In its clawed hand, it held a scanner that pulsed faint red circles onto the walls. Another figure moved past, dragging a long staff tipped with what looked like an energy blade. One of them stopped at the front door, pressing something against it. A strange scratching sound followed, like metal being etched. Ethan's stomach tightened. Whatever it was trying to mark or track the building. He reached for the plasma cutter on his workbench, gripping it tight. For a tense minute, the sound of footsteps circled the workshop. The scanner's hum grew faint, then stronger again, as if they were searching for a signal. Somewhere above, a raindrop slipped through the roof and splashed onto the tarp covering the girl. She flinched slightly in her hiding place, but didn't make a sound. Finally, the hum of the hoverbike started up again. Ethan peeked outside and saw them moving away, their lights shrinking into the rainy night. But just before the last one vanished into the dark, its helmet turned toward his workshop, visor glowing a deep red. It lingered a second too long before following the others. Ethan waited until the hum faded completely before moving. He hurried to the panel, sliding it open. The girl blinked up at him, eyes glassy with confusion and fear. Who were they?" she asked weakly. "Trouble," he said, pulling her out and wrapping the towel around her again. "And I think they were looking for you." Her gaze dropped to the blanket in her hands, and she said nothing. Outside, the rain kept falling, but to Ethan, the night suddenly felt much colder. Lyra's eyes opened slowly, her gaze darting around the workshop as if she had just woken from a nightmare. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket to her chest, and glanced toward the door. "I have to go," she said in a shaky voice, her feet already moving toward the exit. Ethan stepped in front of her, blocking the way. "Not until you tell me what's going on," he said, his voice firm but calm. She avoided his eyes, staring instead at the floor. "They'll hurt you if they find me here," she whispered. "It's better if I leave." Ethan folded his arms. "If you leave now, you won't make it a mile in this weather, and those people, whoever they are, will catch you. You're staying until I get answers." She pressed her lips together, clearly torn between fear and stubbornness, but finally sat back down on the couch. She spoke quietly, choosing her words with care. She said her stepmother got angry with her over nothing and told her she wasn't welcome anymore. It was a short explanation, too short, and Ethan could tell she was hiding something. He had been around enough liars to notice the way her voice trembled when she avoided details. The rain outside eased into a steady drizzle, but the workshop still felt tense. Ethan went back to tinkering with a small maintenance drone, keeping an eye on her. She sat still for a while, hugging her knees, but then her gaze wandered to the shelves of tools and spare parts. After a few minutes, she quietly moved toward the workbench, her fingers brushing over a small flying drone that was half disassembled. Ethan pretended not to notice at first, curious about what she would do. She picked up a small metallic chip from her pocket, something she must have carried with her, and began fitting it into the drone's core. Her fingers moved fast, skilled, like she'd done this before. "What are you doing to my drone?" Ethan asked finally, stepping closer. Lyra didn't look up. "I'm making it harder for them to track me," she replied, her voice low but steady. "Your drone was sending out a standard signal. They can follow that." "Not anymore." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "So you know about tracking tech?" She glanced at him for the first time, her silver eyes sharper now. "I know more than they want me to. That's why they want me back." The way she said it made Ethan certain she was hiding a much bigger story. Before he could ask more, the modified drone beeped, a short, rapid alarm. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound. "That's motion detection," she said quickly. Ethan grabbed the control pad, and a small screen lit up, showing a grainy feed from the drone's camera. Something was moving outside. At first, it was just a faint vibration on the ground, like heavy machinery rumbling far away. But then the image shifted, showing the floorboards trembling slightly. The movement wasn't coming from outside the walls, it was coming from below. Ethan set the control pad down and listened. A deep, unnatural drilling sound echoed from beneath the workshop, growing louder by the second. The vibrations rattled the shelves, a spanner clattering to the floor. Lyra's face had gone pale. "It's them," she whispered, backing toward the corner. Ethan grabbed his old plasma cutter from the rack and powered it on, the blue light buzzing faintly. "Who exactly is them?" he asked, but she shook her head. "If I tell you, you won't help me." The sound beneath them grew sharper, more focused, as if something was boring straight upward. Dust fell from the ceiling and floor cracks. Ethan moved toward the center of the room, ready for whatever was coming. Lyra crouched behind a stack of crates, length clutching the modified drone like it was her lifeline. With a loud crack, a section of the floor split open, sending splinters flying. From the hole rose a strange creature, its body a mix of black chitin and glimmering metal, 6 jointed legs gripping the floor as it lifted itself up. Its head was narrow, with a glowing green lens in place of eyes, and it emitted a series of sharp clicking sounds as it scanned the room. The machine-insect hybrid froze for a moment. Then its lens turned toward the crates where Lyra hid. It emitted a low, rising hum, and thin tendrils extended from its mouth, tasting the air. Ethan stepped between the creature and Lyra, waving the plasma cutter. "Over here, ugly," he said, trying to draw its focus. The creature lunged, its legs clattering loudly on the metal floor. Ethan swung the cutter, slicing one of the tendrils. The machine shrieked, a high-pitched noise that made his ears ring. Still, it kept moving toward Lyra. She suddenly pulled out a small circular device from her pocket and pressed a button. A piercing, high-frequency pulse filled the room. The creature froze mid-lunge, its body twitching violently. Then, with another ear-splitting screech, it turned and scuttled back into the hole, disappearing underground as quickly as it had appeared. The workshop was silent except for Ethan's heavy breathing. He turned to Lyra, who was gripping the device tightly, her hands shaking. "What the hell was that thing?" he demanded. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. "It's called a seeker. My stepmother sends them after runaways." "Runaways?" Ethan repeated. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I'm not just some kid she didn't want. I'm her stepdaughter. She's the queen of one of the most dangerous clans in this sector. She wants to sell me to a warlord for an alliance." She glanced toward the hole in the floor. "And she will send more until I'm caught." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. The rain outside had started again, but this time it felt like the quiet before something much worse. The smell of burnt metal still lingered in the air after the seeker had fled, leaving a jagged hole in the floor. Dust drifted lazily in the faint light from the ceiling lamp, and the silence felt heavy. Lyra sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, gripping the small pulse device like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Ethan paced near the hole, his eyes flicking to it every few seconds, as if expecting the creature to return. "You said that thing was called a seeker," he said, his voice low but sharp. "How many of them does she have?" "Too many," Lyra whispered. "They're built to find and capture without killing, unless she orders otherwise." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "She will order otherwise soon." Ethan studied her for a moment, the pale lilac of her skin looking even fainter under the dim light. "And this warlord you mentioned, he's the reason you ran?" She nodded once quickly. "He's cruel. My stepmother promised me to him when I turned of age. She told me I should be grateful." Her tone was bitter, but her voice trembled. "I won't go to him. I'd rather." She stopped, her eyes darting away. Ethan didn't push. Instead, he crouched near the hole, shining a light into the darkness. The tunnel spiraled downward, the walls reinforced with strange alloy plating. "This thing tunneled in from far away," he muttered. "Means they knew exactly where to find you." Lyra nodded. "They can trace certain energy signatures. My body gives off one. It's part of my bloodline. That's why I changed your drone earlier. They can use anything electronic to find me faster." The thought made Ethan's skin crawl. He glanced toward the window, wondering how long before the next attempt. "If they know where you are, staying here is suicide," he said. "We need to move." Lyra's fingers tightened around the blanket in her lap. "If we leave now, they'll catch us on the road. They'll send seekers ahead of us. The only way to escape is to get off this planet, and every spaceport is guarded by her soldiers." The rain outside had turned into a thin mist, the sound of water dripping from the roof filling the uneasy quiet. Ethan walked over to his storage shelves and began pulling down old gear. An insulated cloak, a compact plasma pistol, and a pair of battered breathing masks. "If we're going to get off this planet," he said, "we're going to need a plan. And you're going to have to trust me enough to tell me everything." Lyra hesitated, then shifted slightly, her silver eyes locking onto his. "You're human. Why would you even help me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he loaded a fresh power cell into the pistol. "Because I've seen what happens when people look the other way, and I'm not the kind of man who can watch it happen again." Before she could reply, a faint noise interrupted them. Soft, deliberate tapping on metal. Ethan froze. The sound was coming from beneath the floor again, but lighter this time, almost like claws carefully testing the surface. Lyra's breath hitched, and she instinctively pressed herself against the wall. Ethan raised a hand, signaling her to stay still. He moved silently toward the hole, the plasma pistol ready. The tapping stopped. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, from the shadows of the tunnel, a faint green glow appeared, slowly moving closer. Ethan cursed under his breath. "It's back." But it wasn't. As the glow neared the opening, Ethan saw it was smaller, smoother, another device entirely. A spherical probe floated up from the darkness, scanning the room in slow arcs. It made a faint humming sound, and the moment it faced Lyra, its glow brightened sharply. Without thinking, Ethan fired. The plasma bolt hit the sphere dead center, making it spark and crash to the floor, smoke curling up from the damage. But the instant it went dark, a deep, echoing roar came from the tunnel below. "They know where we are now," Lyra said, her voice trembling. That was a beacon. The ground vibrated under their feet again, but this time it wasn't a single seeker. The rumble was heavier, faster. More of them, maybe 3 or 4, closing in fast. Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the back exit. "We're not waiting for them to come up here," he said. They ran through the workshop's storage hall, the air thick with the smell of oil and dust. Ethan pushed open the heavy rear door, and cold night air rushed in. The mist outside swirled around the dim lights of the industrial yard. They sprinted past rusting machinery and old cargo containers, heading for the narrow service road that led toward the hills. Behind them, a metallic screech split the night, followed by the sound of armored legs tearing through the floor of the workshop. Lyra risked a glance over her shoulder and saw the first seeker pull itself into the open, its lens glowing bright green. Two more followed, their bodies gleaming wet in the mist. "They're faster than us," she cried. "Not if we make it to the ridge," Ethan replied, pulling her harder. "I've got a friend there with something they can't track." They reached the far end of the yard, where a chain-link fence separated the property from the rocky slope beyond. Ethan drew a small cutter from his belt and sliced through the metal. They slipped through the opening just as one of the seekers lunged forward, its claws snapping inches from Lyra's leg. They climbed the slope, the wet rocks slick under their boots. The seekers followed, their legs pounding against stone, the sound echoing through the valley. The climb was brutal, but Ethan kept pulling her upward, his grip firm. When they reached the top, Lyra looked down at the path they'd taken. The mist hid most of the valley, but she could still see the green glows moving steadily closer. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the certainty that her stepmother wouldn't stop. Ethan glanced at her, his face set in determination. "We have one shot at this," he said. "If we fail, they'll take us both." Lyra met his gaze and nodded, her fear replaced by something else, resolve. The glow of the seekers below grew brighter, and the night air felt heavy with the promise of the chase to come. Ethan and Lyra reached the ridge and moved along a narrow trail that wound between jagged rocks. The mist clung to their clothes, and the air was cold enough to sting their lungs. They didn't speak for several minutes, both listening for the sound of the seekers below. Every few steps, Ethan glanced back to make sure the glowing green lenses weren't closing in. After what felt like hours, they reached a flat outcrop overlooking a deep canyon. The moonlight broke through the clouds, revealing a vast landscape of black stone and distant lights from the city far below. Ethan crouched behind a boulder, catching his breath. Lyra leaned against the rock, clutching her blanket tightly, the golden crest glinting faintly in the pale light. Ethan noticed it again, this strange symbol stitched into the corner. It wasn't decorative. It had the sharp, deliberate lines of a seal or a brand. He had seen something like it before, back when he worked salvage jobs near old war zones. He remembered finding it painted on the hulls of destroyed ships and etched into the armor of fallen soldiers. He reached out, touching the fabric lightly. "This mark, where did you get it?" he asked. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't pull the blanket away. "It's mine. It's been mine since I was born." "It's not just yours," Ethan said, his voice quiet. "This is the royal crest of the Zarin Dominion. If anyone sees you with it, they'll know exactly who you are." Her shoulders tensed. "That's why I keep it hidden. If they know I'm alive, they'll use me again." She looked out toward the city lights, her voice dropping lower. "That crest means I'm property. My stepmother made sure of that when my father died." Ethan felt a cold weight in his stomach. The Zarin Dominion had a reputation for brutality, and if Lyra was truly connected to them, hiding her wasn't just dangerous, it was treason. "You understand what this means," he said. "If anyone finds you here, they'll execute both of us." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I tried to leave. I didn't want you to be part of this." The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of engines from far away. They both froze, scanning the horizon. Ethan saw movement, small pinpricks of red and blue light descending toward the city. "Patrol ships. We can't stay here," he said quickly. "And we need to get to the spaceport before they lock it down." Lyra's expression hardened. "The spaceport is guarded by her soldiers. We can't just walk in." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we don't walk in. We sneak in." They began the trek down the opposite side of the ridge, following a rough path toward the city outskirts. The terrain shifted from rock to dry dirt, the air thick with the smell of industry. By the time they reached the edge of the city, the sky was tinged with the first hint of dawn. The spaceport loomed in the distance, a massive circular structure surrounded by tall walls and guarded gates. Ethan knew there was no chance of getting through the main entrances without being recognized. But he also knew of an old cargo access route that led beneath the loading platforms. They made their way through back alleys and empty streets, keeping to the shadows. Lyra kept her head down, the blanket pulled tightly around her. At one point, they passed a group of uniformed soldiers. Lyra tensed, but Ethan kept walking, his grip firm on her shoulder, guiding her away. They reached a rusted maintenance gate at the far side of the spaceport. Ethan pulled a small tool from his pocket and began working on the lock. Lyra kept watch, her silver eyes scanning the alley behind them. The lock clicked open, and they slipped inside. The tunnel beyond was dark and smelled of oil and stale air. Pipes lined the walls, dripping condensation. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing softly. At the far end, faint light spilled through a grate, and the low rumble of engines filled the air. Ethan crouched to peer through the grate. On the other side, a loading platform stretched out, crates stacked high and workers moving between them. Above, ships waited with cargo ramps open, ready to depart. He was about to push the grate aside when a sharp metallic sound echoed down the tunnel. Lyra stiffened. "Someone's behind us." Ethan turned, raising his pistol. From the shadows of the tunnel, a figure emerged, tall, wrapped in a black cloak, a breathing mask covering most of its face. In one hand, it held a long, curved blade. In the other, a set of glowing restraints. "Lyra Zarin," the figure said, its voice cold and mechanical. "By order of the Queen, you are to be returned to her custody immediately." Ethan stepped in front of Lyra, his pistol aimed at the figure's chest. "She's not going anywhere with you." The figure tilted its head slightly. "You're human. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Hiding her is a death sentence for you." "Then I guess I'll die standing," Ethan replied. The figure lunged forward, swinging the blade in a sharp arc. Ethan fired, but the shot glanced off the attacker's armor. They traded blows in the narrow tunnel, sparks flying as the plasma pistol's barrel clashed with the blade. Lyra backed away, looking for an opening to escape, but the cloaked figure moved too fast. In desperation, she grabbed a loose pipe from the wall and swung it, striking the attacker's arm. The blow made the restraints fall to the floor, glowing faintly. Ethan took the chance, shoving the attacker back into the darkness. "Run!" he shouted. They scrambled to the grate, Ethan kicking it loose. They climbed through, spilling onto the loading platform. Workers stared for a moment, but before anyone could react, a loud hiss filled the air. A hologram flickered to life above the platform, projecting the image of Lyra's stepmother. Her eyes burned with cold fury. "Bring her to the palace in 24 hours, she said, her voice echoing across the spaceport, "or I will burn your home to the ground." Lyra froze, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the nearest ship, but the weight of the threat hung heavy between them. Her stepmother now knew exactly where they were. Ethan pulled Lyra into the shadow of a large cargo container, his hand still gripping hers tightly. The hologram had already faded, but its echo seemed to linger in the air, heavy and threatening. Lyra's breathing was quick, her silver eyes wide with fear. "She's not bluffing," she whispered. "If she says she'll burn your home, she will." Ethan looked around the busy platform. Workers moved crates, loaders rumbled by, and dock guards patrolled the edges, scanning every face. "Then we don't give her the chance," he said. "We get you far away before her soldiers get here." They began weaving through the stacks of cargo, keeping low. Ethan's eyes scanned for a ship they could use, something unguarded or with a crew willing to be bribed. But every vessel had tight security, and most of the workers avoided even glancing at strangers. As they passed between two tall stacks of metal crates, a shadow moved ahead. A tall figure stepped into their path, wearing a worn brown jacket and a dusty scarf around his neck. His reptilian eyes narrowed at Ethan, then shifted to Lyra. "You're making a mistake bringing her here, human," the stranger said. Ethan didn't slow. "Out of the way." "She's worth more than you know," the stranger continued, smirking. "I could take her to someone who would pay handsomely." Ethan raised his plasma pistol slightly. "You could also take a step back and live to see tomorrow." The stranger studied him for a moment, then shrugged and stepped aside. But as Ethan and Lyra passed, the man tapped something on his wrist, and a faint red light blinked to life on a nearby wall. Lyra noticed it instantly. "He just marked us," she whispered urgently. Ethan cursed under his breath and quickened their pace. They had to find a ship now. He spotted a freighter at the far edge of the platform, its crew unloading supplies. The ship's ramp was down, and the guards looked bored rather than alert. They made their way toward it, but before they were halfway there, a sharp whistle cut through the noise. Ethan turned to see the brown-jacketed stranger pointing at them, shouting something in a language he didn't understand. Around the platform, heads turned. The dock guards began moving in their direction. "Run," Ethan said. They sprinted between crates, dodging workers and leaping over small cargo trolleys. Behind them, the guards shouted and gave chase. Lyra's blanket slipped from her shoulders, but she didn't stop to grab it. They reached the freighter's ramp just as one of the crew noticed them. "What do you think you're doing?" the crewman demanded, stepping forward. "Emergency passage," Ethan said quickly. "We'll pay." The crewman's eyes narrowed, but before he could answer, a loud metallic clank rang out. Something small and spherical rolled onto the ramp, an energy net device. It popped open with a sharp flash, and a glowing mesh shot toward them. Lyra screamed as it wrapped around her, locking her in place. Ethan spun toward the source of the attack. The brown-jacketed stranger was there, grinning, holding the device's control pad. "Told you she's worth more than you think," he said. Ethan didn't think. He lunged forward, grabbing the control pad and smashing it against the metal floor. The net flickered, then collapsed, releasing Lyra. She stumbled to her feet, but the stranger was already pulling a knife from his belt. The crewman shouted for security, but Ethan moved faster. He swung the butt of his pistol, striking the stranger across the jaw. The man fell, the knife skidding across the ramp. Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her up the freighter's ramp. The crewman blocked their way again, looking more nervous than angry now. "You're bringing trouble onto my ship," he said. "That trouble will be here in 30 seconds, Ethan replied, his voice low and urgent. "Let us on, and I'll give you something worth your while." The crewman hesitated, then stepped aside. They rushed inside, moving through the narrow corridors until they found a small storage room. Ethan closed the door behind them and leaned against it, his chest rising and falling quickly. Lyra sat on a crate, hugging herself. "She's not going to stop," she said quietly. "Even if we leave this planet, she'll send hunters after me. She wants me back because I'm not just her stepdaughter. I'm leverage. With me, she can force the warlord to do whatever she wants." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "And without you, she loses that power." "Yes," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper, "which is why she'd rather see me dead than free." Before Ethan could reply, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Dock security is boarding," a voice said. "All crew to the main ramp." Ethan's stomach sank. They had only minutes before the guards searched the ship. He looked around the storage room and spotted an old maintenance hatch in the floor. "Come on," he said, pulling it open. They climbed down into the crawl space beneath the storage room, the air hot and smelling of metal. Ethan closed the hatch above them, just as heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Muffled voices followed, asking questions, demanding to see the crew's cargo. In the darkness, Lyra's hand found his. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't owe me anything." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, "Because no one else will." Above them, the footsteps moved away. The tension in the air eased slightly, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last. Even if they got off the planet, the Queen's threat was real. He had no illusions. Protecting Lyra meant stepping into a fight he could never walk away from. When the sound of the guards faded completely, Ethan opened the hatch again. "We're not safe yet," he said. "But we've got a head start. Let's make it count." They slipped out of the crawl space and back into the ship's corridors, heading toward the engine room. If they could hide until the freighter left the dock, they might finally be beyond the Queen's reach, at least for a little while. But deep down, both of them knew the chase was far from over. The freighter's engines rumbled like a distant storm as it lifted from the platform, the vibration humming through the walls. Ethan and Lyra stayed hidden in the engine room, crouched behind a stack of supply crates. The smell of warm metal and oil filled the air, mixing with the faint ozone scent from the ship's power cores. For a while, neither of them spoke, They only listened to the steady rhythm of the ship as it climbed higher and higher. When the noise of the docking clamps finally stopped, Ethan allowed himself a small breath of relief. "We're off the ground," he said quietly. "That's one problem gone." But Lyra didn't look relieved. She sat with her arms around her knees, staring at the floor. "She'll know," she whispered. "The Queen always knows." Ethan didn't answer. He had no illusions. She was probably right. Still, he needed a plan before fear took over completely. "Where does this ship go?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "Cargo routes. Maybe the next colony, maybe further. But every colony in this sector owes something to her. There's nowhere safe in her territory." Ethan frowned. "Then we have to get out of her territory entirely. That means a jump through an independent trade route." Before they could discuss more, a loud metallic clang echoed down the corridor outside. Footsteps followed, heavy and deliberate. Ethan's hand went to his pistol. He peered around the edge of the crate just in time to see the engine room door slide open. A crew member entered, an older man with grease stains on his coveralls. He carried a data pad in one hand, glancing at it as he walked. He didn't seem to notice them at first, but then his eyes flicked toward their hiding place. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Ethan stepped out slowly, his free hand raised. "We're just passengers looking for a quiet place to ride this trip out. We're not here to cause trouble." The man narrowed his eyes. "Passengers? I wasn't told about any passengers." His gaze shifted to Lyra, lingering on her lilac skin and silver eyes. Recognition flashed there, and his expression hardened. "You're her," he said. "The girl from the broadcast." Lyra tensed, ready to run, but Ethan moved between them. "She's not going back," he said. The crewman's face tightened. "If I turn her in, I could retire tomorrow." Ethan took a slow step closer, his voice low and sharp. "Or you could keep your mouth shut, and we could all walk away from this alive." The tension held for a long moment before the crewman muttered a curse and turned away. "You didn't see me? I didn't see you. But you need to get off this ship before it docks again. The next stop won't be friendly." He left without another word, the door sliding shut behind him. Lyra exhaled shakily. "We can't stay hidden here. He's right. As soon as we land, they'll search every ship for me." Ethan nodded. "Then we get off before it docks." Hours passed as the freighter traveled through the quiet of space. When the subtle vibration of the engines shifted, Ethan knew they were entering descent. He peeked through a small service window in the engine room and saw the pale glow of a planet below. The city lights shimmered like scattered jewels across the surface. "This is it," he said. "We move now." They slipped into the narrow maintenance tunnels that ran along the side of the ship. The metal walls were tight and cold, forcing them to crouch as they moved. The hum of the ship grew louder the closer they got to the outer hull. Finally, they reached a small hatch that led to the underside of the vessel. Ethan opened the panel, and cold air rushed in. The planet's surface was still hundreds of feet below, the landscape rushing past as the freighter approached the spaceport. "We're going to drop before they land," he told her. Lyra's eyes widened. "Drop? Without a ship?" He held up two small devices, grav chutes. "Not without these." There was no time for hesitation. He strapped one onto her back and secured the other for himself. The moment the ship flew over a patch of empty ground, he kicked the hatch open wider and leapt out, pulling Lyra with him. The air tore past them, cold and sharp, the wind howling in their ears. Lyra clung to him as the grav chutes engaged, slowing their fall just enough to keep them alive. They hit the ground hard, rolling over the rough dirt before coming to a stop. Ethan pulled her up quickly. "Come on, we need cover before anyone sees where we landed." They ran toward a line of old storage buildings at the edge of the spaceport district. Inside one of the abandoned warehouses, they finally stopped to catch their breath. The air was thick with dust, and broken machinery lay scattered across the floor. Lyra leaned against the wall, her face pale. "We're in the royal city," she said softly. "Her palace is here." Ethan looked out through a crack in the wall. In the distance, tall spires rose against the horizon, their crystal tips glowing faintly in the evening light. Guards patrolled the streets near the base of the palace walls, their armor gleaming under the setting sun. "This is enemy territory," he said quietly. "We can't stay long." But Lyra shook her head. "We have to go inside." Ethan turned to her sharply. "Inside the palace? Are you insane? She's keeping others there, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Children, servants, prisoners. If we leave now, they'll never get out. Ethan studied her for a long moment. He could see she meant it. She wasn't thinking about her own safety anymore. She was thinking about those trapped inside. He sighed heavily. Then we need disguises, and a way past those walls without setting off every alarm in the city. As the sky darkened outside, the first lights of the palace began to shimmer, casting long shadows across the streets. Somewhere in that glittering fortress was the queen who wanted Lyra back, and now they were walking straight toward her. The city at night glowed with soft golden lights, but to Ethan it felt more like the inside of a predator's mouth, beautiful on the surface, deadly underneath. He and Lyra moved through the narrow side streets, keeping to the darkest alleys. The air smelled faintly of spice and smoke from the food stalls closing for the night, but above that scent was the constant metallic tang of the palace walls. They loomed in the distance, high and glimmering, guarded by sentries in silver armor. Ethan had managed to steal 2 plain workers' cloaks from a laundry line. Lyra wore hers with the hood pulled low over her face, hiding her silver eyes. They walked at a steady pace, blending in with the late-night laborers heading back from the markets. Every time they passed a checkpoint, Ethan kept his head down, his grip tight on Lyra's shoulder as if guiding a younger sibling. They approached a quieter section of the palace wall, where a single guard stood near a small side gate. Beyond the gate was a courtyard leading to one of the palace's service wings. Ethan knew it was their best chance to slip inside without being noticed by the main patrols. As they neared, Lyra's steps slowed. Her voice was barely a whisper. If they catch you here, they'll kill you first. You don't have to do this. Ethan glanced at her, his face hard but his tone gentle. You asked me to be your dad. That means I don't leave you behind. The guard at the gate barely looked up as Ethan approached, pretending to carry a bundle of cloth under his arm. With his other hand, he discreetly pressed a small device against the wall, a signal jammer he'd taken from the freighter's engine room. The guard's earpiece crackled, and for a moment he looked confused. That was all the opening Ethan needed. He stepped forward, striking the guard hard in the side of the neck. The man crumpled silently. They slipped through the gate into the courtyard. The air was warmer here, scented with flowers growing along the stone paths. But the beauty was nothing more than a mask for what lay inside. Across the courtyard, they could hear muffled cries, small voices, frightened, coming from somewhere deeper in the palace. Lyra's face tightened. That's them, she whispered. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows until they reached a narrow hallway lit by dim lanterns. The walls here were decorated with carved patterns, each depicting the crest from Lyra's blanket. The sight made her shiver, but she kept moving. At the end of the hall, they found a heavy door guarded by 2 sentries. Ethan pulled Lyra back into an alcove. Stay here, he murmured. Before she could protest, he stepped into the light and approached the guards. What's your business here? One of them demanded. Delivering supplies for the queen, Ethan said evenly, showing the bundle of cloth. The second guard stepped closer, suspicion in his eyes. Show me. Ethan tossed the bundle forward. As the guard reached for it, Ethan struck, elbow to the jaw, a sharp kick to the knee. The first guard went down fast, the second struggling just long enough for Ethan to slam his head against the wall. Both were unconscious before they could shout. Lyra hurried over, helping him drag the bodies out of sight. Ethan pushed open the heavy door, and the sound of chains rattling met their ears. Inside, the room was dim and smelled of damp stone. Along the walls were narrow cages, each holding someone inside. Most were children, some alien, some human, all with the same look of exhaustion and fear. Lyra ran to the nearest cage. We're getting you out, she whispered to the child inside, a small girl with blue skin and wide, terrified eyes. Ethan found a set of keys hanging on the wall and began unlocking the cages. One by one, the captives stepped out, some too weak to walk without help. But as the last cage swung open, a loud alarm blared through the palace. Lyra's heart leapt into her throat. She knows we're here, she said. Ethan didn't waste time. We move now. They led the group back through the hallway, but the sound of armored boots grew louder from every direction. The exit to the courtyard was already blocked by soldiers. Trapped, Ethan turned to Lyra. "Take them through the servant tunnels," he said quickly. "I'll hold them off." "No," she said, grabbing his arm. "I'm not leaving you." He gave her a tight, almost desperate smile. "You're my kid now. That means you get to live." Before she could argue, he pushed her toward the far corner where a hidden door was half buried behind old crates. Lyra understood. He was giving her a chance, even if it meant he wouldn't make it. She swallowed hard, leading the children toward the tunnel. Ethan turned back to face the soldiers. The first wave came in fast, but he was faster, his plasma pistol cutting through the narrow hall. For a few moments, the only sound was the hiss and crackle of energy fire. But they kept coming. In the tunnel, Lyra guided the children through the twisting passageways. The air was damp and cold, but the path was clear. Behind them, the distant echo of fighting faded, replaced by the heavy silence of stone walls. Finally, they emerged outside the palace walls into the cover of night. Lyra looked back, her chest aching. She didn't know if Ethan was still alive. The children huddled around her, their small hands gripping her cloak. Then, just when she thought she'd lost him forever, a shadow moved near the edge of the alley. Ethan stepped out, bruised and breathing hard, but alive. Lyra ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "I thought you stayed behind to die," she said, her voice breaking. He rested a hand on her head. "Not tonight." As they disappeared into the dark streets, the sound of the palace fading behind them, Lyra's voice was soft but certain. "You're my dad now, right?" Ethan squeezed her hand, his eyes on the stars above. "Yeah, kid, I'm your dad."